So this is the state of the pod. This is the state of the pod, Alex. We're telling everybody about the state of the podcast. Take it away.
So we actually recorded this episode a couple weeks ago because we've been doing the podcast for 6 months and wanted to pause, look at where we've been, and give you guys an idea of where we hope to go with this thing. We're also pretty excited because we just hit the threshold of 25,000 downloads. So that's absolutely crazy. We can't thank all you guys enough for listening to us ramble.
Thanks, Mom.
Some of the coolest things in the world, just like last week, feedback we've gotten that were super neat. I should look up this guy's name. I'll try and find it by the end of recording this so I can shout him out by name. But walking into an Army football game last weekend, I was like called out as I walked in with somebody asking, "Are you mopsnmoes?" And that was extremely surreal for me. Pretty neat. He got a sticker. If you see me in public, I will absolutely give you a sticker.
He literally walks around with a fanny pack full of stickers.
I do. Got to stay strapped. But another shout out we got. This is shout out Rob Orr. Thanks for coming on the podcast. But he was down there at the Land Forces Convention Summit. I don't know what it's called, in Australia. So like as far away as you could possibly be. And multiple people came up and said cool things about the podcast. So that was super neat. But the biggest takeaway we got from him and kind of the feedback we got that we really liked that kind of validate the way we do this thing was that people really appreciated the quote, gents having a chat style, the casual approach. And that's something we've been kind of committed to, partly because we don't want to write any scripts, but partly because it seems to work pretty well. So hopefully you guys like that as much as the Aussies do. So.
Yeah, we don't have a guest on today. This is Alex and I talking, kind of giving an update, a little bit of a background about the podcast to date. How some of this, I think we touched on episode 0 a little bit when we kicked things off, but walking through some thoughts about some of the guests we've had. And then I think almost more importantly, some of the things that we would like to do in the future, which opens up a big conversation for us, at least, around leaving reviews, liking the podcast, subscribing to the podcast. Both of us recognize that we are very much amateur podcasters. We're not good at saying things like, follow, subscribe. We're going to try to be better about it. But if there are things that people are interested in, guests that they want to see come on, that's really kind of why we wanted to put this episode out as sort of a just a timestamp between the usual content to kind of say hello to the listeners.
And I did want to help out with one thing too. I know there's like a little bit of a brand difference between the stuff on the Instagram and the stuff on the podcast. So I know there are some listeners out there who don't follow it, who don't understand what the hell I'm talking about when I say Lake Tuck Nation, all that kind of stuff. But if you are someone who found your way to this podcast, not because of the social media, and you want to reach out to us, you want to provide feedback, you want to ask questions, whatever it is, I want to present the opportunity to do that. So the easy way for that right now, until we get a website, which we talk a little bit about in the episode. But in the meantime, the best way is to just email me. And the go-to email address for that is mopsnmoes@gmail.com. That's mopsnmoes@gmail.com.
Not and. If you type and, it will not go anywhere.
Correct. Just the letter N, no underscores, nothing else, just letters.
Last thing we want to do before we kick off the episode is a quick shout out. There is an organization here in the sort of Fort Bragg, North Carolina area, Shields and Stripes. They are hosting the 2nd annual golf classic. So if you are in the area / a golfer / interested in supporting a nonprofit that specifically works to heal first responders, law enforcement, and veterans after experiencing trauma, head over to their website. That's Shields and Stripes. It's a 4-man golf tournament, and you can also enter the raffle for a Sig Sauer rifle. So if you're a gun guy or a golf guy, this is probably the place to be. So shout out those guys. It's a good cause. And with that, I think enjoy the episode. Welcome to State of the Pod with Drew and Alex, in which we take a quick breather from your regularly scheduled program to talk about the podcast to talk about mops and moes. Alex, why did we start a podcast?
Like what led to creating a podcast? Yeah, it's a little bit of a good question because I can like barely remember the beginning of this. I know that if I look back like 18 months or something, I don't know, whenever the very beginning of the Mops and Moes page was, I already had a microphone because I knew that my life was so empty that what I needed to fill the hole in my soul was a podcast. But seriously, I knew the genesis of Mops and Moes was that I was at the physical fitness school getting all this great information and like teaching it to like 30 or so NCOs every month. And it was frustrating to me that it seemed like there was so much low hanging fruit that we weren't communicating out to the Army. And I was like, hey, why don't we just like start posting this stuff and like making it more readily accessible? Like we work for the whole Army, right? But there's all these hurdles. There's hurdles to having candid conversations, and there's hurdles to putting out good information because everything has to go through public affairs and like whether or not it's like in line with the talking points of the week, and all these issues make it really tough. So I said, fine, I'll do it myself. Right. So that's where the Instagram page came from. But really quickly you learn, and you guys see this all the time, that it's really hard to have nuanced conversations on a platform like Instagram. It's good for like witty one-liners. It's not really good for like digging into anything remotely complex. So I think the podcast was the effort to bring it into a forum where you could have better conversations about it.
Yeah, and I don't remember. So, I mean, I think we both agreed, maybe before we even started recording, that with as big as H2F specifically, but more broadly with as big as embedded human performance in the tactical space is going to become over the next few years. Like for me as a strength coach and having done this for my whole career, we saw this as an opportunity to hopefully start to control or steer some of the conversation around what we think right looks like, and then also shine the light on some folks that we feel are doing well in this field or that we think can add value to this field. So like, for example, in some of the episodes, we like intentionally look for folks that may not necessarily be quote unquote tactical human performance professionals, but part of their body of work or part of their message maybe could be value add to coaches that are sort of either new to the game or just like caught up in the reps and sets and like the day-to-day grind. And so when the two of us decided, hey, we'll buy microphones and start a podcast, like one, we had no clue what we were doing. We still have no clue what we're doing. We record these on Zoom and then Alex edits them because he doesn't have a child, and voila, they go on Spotify and people listen to it. But I think it's been interesting, and you and I have talked about this a lot. The podcast kind of caught legs and sort of caught fire. And now at conferences or at work or just talking to other folks on LinkedIn or whatever, like there's discussion happening separate from like you and I prodding people, which I think is super interesting. And it's crazy to just like meet someone. Oh, you're like Mops and Moes, love that podcast. I like this episode, blah, 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 blah. Like, I'm not saying we're world famous, but within the kind of space of tactical human performance, I think it's definitely had an impact, which is cool to see.
It's also cool just because a lot of these are conversations we kind of have anyway. A lot of these people are already in the space. Some aren't, but a lot are. Some of them are people one or the other or both of us have worked with in the past or work with currently. And there's a lot of goodness that comes out when we have these conversations offline. And all we really did was like create a space to have these conversations in like an unofficial, low stakes kind of environment. I know a few people have asked me for like podcasting advice now that we're like been doing it for a few months. And I
don't record intros.
Right. So Drew already said it. We don't really have any idea what we're doing. We're making it up as we go along. Trick number one for podcasting is like record 5 or 6 or 7 episodes and then just throw them all away because that was you practicing.
We have a backlog of things that we just probably will never publish.
For sure. And then, I don't know, we try, like, I think people would tell you that we go into episodes like less prepared than we should be sometimes. Like we often, like the day of, or like texting each other like an hour before the episode, like, what are we going to talk to this guy about? And I honestly think that's helped a lot. I think some podcasts, you can tell that they have a list of like 7 or 10 questions typed out that they like want to get through, and it becomes really stiff and the transitions are awkward. We've tried to create something that's just like a pretty casual conversation. And I don't know, audience can tell us whether it's working or not, but I think it's added value to make it less structured. You can tell that the guests don't have like a read ahead before they come on. We have not told them what we're going to ask them. Just show up and have a conversation.
Well, and that was the other thing too. And I kind of was joking about it just a second ago, but like to Alex's point about we want it to feel authentic, and these are conversations that we have anyway with these people. Like there's a reason why we read the bios of these folks in the preamble and we don't have them do the canned, like, tell us your background before we kick off. Because like, yes, we record a podcast, but we also consume podcasts. And I think to have the guests feel natural and feel comfortable and just talk with us, we have found success literally just hitting record. And so what you guys hear is obviously the most valuable part of the conversation, but there's been quite a few times with guests where, like, especially the ones that we know well, where there's sometimes up to like 15-20 minutes of us just like rambling with them before we actually press play. And there's a lot of value in those chunks as well. And so we do try to bring that around and kind of touch on some of the hot topics, touch on things that we think folks will be interested in listening to. But yeah, in terms of like tips and tricks, man, I don't know. Just start recording.
I think that kind of brings us to a conversation about like, what do we want like the future of the podcast and the platform to look like?
Joe Rogan.
Yeah, one day we want to pay the bills. But I've solicited feedback on the Instagram page, gotten some recommendations from people. We talked to some of the guests about this. We talked to each other about this. Like what things are we looking to spotlight? And I'll tell you, I don't think our goal is to bring on the best known names in the industry just because those people already have platforms. It wouldn't hurt. And like, we will certainly bring on people with their own platforms when we get the opportunity to do so, if we think they have a message that'll contribute to kind of the narrative we're trying to put together in terms of things we don't think get said enough in the tactical human performance conversation. But I think something we've been able to do pretty successfully so far is find people that don't really have a platform, but have something really interesting to say or a really interesting body of work and bring them on. So I'd love to hear from the listeners and stuff. Is that accurate? Is that been cool for you guys that we're bringing on some people who might not be known quantities in the space, things like that?
Well, and I think too, and we talked about this specifically, I remember after the episode with Dan Bornstein, because I think early on, there was a lot of positive feedback around, what did we call it? Like the reps and sets type stuff. Like people just want reps and sets. Like, how do you do zone 2? Like, how do you program this? How do you program that? And those are fun to do. And I like talking to people about that. And we do have some guests lined up that talk about that type of thing. But I remember with Dan's episode specifically, when he was talking about going up and talking to Congress, and then you and I were sort of debriefing after the fact, we sort of were like, wow, there's a real opportunity here to go down a lot of different rabbit holes and expose people in our industry to a lot of different things, specifically in Dan's case, like policy level stuff around, like, you may not call it human performance, but just sort of health and wellness in general. And that obviously drives a lot of this industry too. And I think going into this, we didn't even really think about that as a door that we would be able to open. Similarly with like Dave DeGroot, like a lot of these folks that we bring on are connected with other folks that we can reach out to and kind of bring into the conversation and hopefully provide a platform that gets away from just the reps and sets piece and more into the, hey, let's have a dialogue around this thing, whatever this thing is that we all work in.
Yeah, I think this is just an appeal to the audience, right? Slide into the DMs, let us know is like which messages are resonating, which messages are not resonating. What do you want to hear more of? There will still be those reps and sets kind of episodes because we think some of that like practical, actionable stuff is always good. But we've really enjoyed having some of these conversations about the bigger picture. I know this will come as a surprise to roughly 0 people, but like I really want to bring somebody on to provide like the physical education perspective. I think there's a conversation about like the roles of nonprofits in this space. I think there's a conversation about how we educate professionals in this space. I think there's all these like kind of bigger picture conversations that contribute to the state of health, fitness, wellness beyond just what we do in the gym. So
Yeah. And we've also, I mean, I guess we can tell people we are talking, we're working on starting a website, because I think one thing that, while you were at TSAC, I wasn't there, but having been in this industry for a long time and then hearing from you what you sort of saw in that space, like it's very clear that there's an appetite for, I'll use the word forum, but like there's an appetite for the ability to connect with people in the space and have open dialogue. And I think we've seen some of this. I'll sort of shine the light on H2F again, because there's this massive influx of coaches and professional. I mean, we're talking like, well, by the time it's all said and done in a decade or so, we're talking thousands of new faces in this space. And yes, going to a conference and like professional certifying bodies, that's cool. And those have their benefits, but I don't really think that there's a place right now, at least, where you can just kind of log in and reach out to people who might do like what Rob Orr does and conduct a lot of research, or what, Dan and Dave do, or what Alec does, or Evan. And so I think we didn't necessarily set out to discover the need for a network, but we sort of stumbled into it. And I think we're looking at some ways in which we can kind of leverage the fact that we are 2 idiots talking into microphones, and have created a bit of a platform, and hopefully turn that into something productive for everyone. So stand by on that piece.
And that does come with a disclaimer. Obviously, we're trying to get this information out like as widely as possible, and we want to make as much good, accessible content as we can. But there does come a point where we may need to ask for a little bit of money to make this thing kind of sustainable.
Be $1,000 membership fee.
Exactly. It's a very exclusive club. I was once upon a time, this is probably like 2 or 3 months ago, somebody who was very grumpy at me made like an anonymous Instagram account to accuse me of like shilling stickers with a bunch of like hack content stuff.
Wait, somebody made an Alex Morrow burner account?
No. I can't even remember the name of the Instagram. It was dumb, but they were very mad at me for some reason. But somebody very grumpy with me thought that this whole platform was all about like just trolling to sell stickers,
which it is not.
I do hope deep down that person is listening right now, so I can lay out real quickly. I don't think people understand that like the sticker game is not
slaps, like baby.
It's not a gold mine. I'll be clear. Like it is. It takes a bunch of. I was talking to somebody else who runs like a meme account that's much more popular than mine, and they gave up on merch because it was killing them. Like you don't make that much money. It's super annoying to stuff in a bunch of envelopes, and the margins on stickers are not what you might hope. So this mopsnmoes broadly has definitely been like a money losing enterprise to date. This microphone cost money. If I counted my time as being worth money, be a hugely money losing thing. Like just today, I spent probably a combined couple hours, maybe more than that, between like making some content stuff, editing the episode we're going to publish on Sunday. So you guys have asked for programming. You guys have asked for feedback stuff. You guys have asked for class kind of content. That's all stuff we would love to do.
Yeah. It takes time.
But like Drew has like a whole family and stuff. And I still have like some things I would like to do with my free time.
Listen, the mopsnmoes listeners are my family. Also, I love my wife and my daughter if she's listening, which she won't be. But yeah. So I guess that maybe I'll plug the Instagram and just solicit feedback on sort of things that people listening think would add value to the platform. Maybe is a good way to phrase that, because I think, like, me being a strength coach, I default to like, hey, it'd be cool to have programming, but like that's also a service that's available in a lot of other places. Hey, it'd be great to, have maybe a I don't want to say stable because like that sounds bad, but like a stable of coaches that we could use this platform to have them put in touch with athletes that maybe you're looking for training from tactical specialists. I don't know. Like, we've talked about a lot of different things. Point being, the podcast, I think, is just serving as a conduit for something that could potentially be much bigger and more valuable to folks that want to kind of get their hands dirty and maybe get involved or take benefit from sort of what we're uncovering in the tactical human performance space. I think that made sense. That might not have made any sense at all, but
I think it made sense. Hopefully it made sense to me. Hopefully it made sense to everybody else. I think the sky's the limit here. Like, we can look at creating all sorts of thkind We just want to know from you guys what would be value added. Like, if there were like, I kind of already listed off all the ideas I already have, but like blog content, is that interesting? Seminar kind of stuff, is that interesting? Programming, do you guys want that? Like, being able to find coaches, do you want that? I don't know what it is.
jobs. We talked about job boards.
Yeah. So there's all sorts of stuff out there.
More videos of Alex working out, like those exist too.
I get very frustrated with, and we've talked about this in the podcast in the past, but I'll put a ton of effort into like reading a bunch of studies and like putting together like a multi-part series of posts, diving into something I think is really interesting and relevant and valuable. And it'll do all right. And like a couple hundred people like it, whatever, who knows? And then I'll put together a 20-second video of me doing like 2 exercises that are neat. And it'll get like 1,000 likes. It'll go everywhere. And I get a bunch of new followers.
How did because today
social media.
You had a video of you working out in tights, I believe.
Oh, that was on my personal Instagram. You got to pay for that kind of access.
I was going to say that there were a lot of things I wanted to say, like podcast is over, but I was curious at how that performed. Yeah. Keep the tights off, mobs.
That's the members only content on the website,
man. Oh man. Well, I guess in terms of wrap ups, like, yeah, we're really sort of turning this over to everyone to say, hey, like, we're not doing this so Drew and Alex can stare at each other on Zoom and talk. As much fun as it is to do that with you, Alex. Yeah, thanks. But seriously, like, Alex runs the Instagram, so storm him and message him and like annoy the crap out of him. Thankfully, I'm removed from it. And ideas, guests, whatever, like we want this to do the most good for the most amount of people, I suppose I'll say.
Pretty soon, Alex is going to need a break from the Instagram, and he's going to have to hand it over to Drew for a couple of weeks
and I'll just put as many videos of Alex working on tights as I can find.
There you go.
And we'll to the moon. All right. That was everything I have.
I'm good.
Bye, guys.